Hello, and it is so good to be back flying again after the whole world came to an end with the COVID-19 virus. Now, the government are starting to release their restrictions, so today I'm flying from Sydney down to Melbourne with Qantas in economy class. Now, I do this flight quite regularly and I usually wouldn't film it, but I thought it might be interesting to see what it's like now with all the social isolation restrictions, some of which are still in place. So let's go and check in. And I've walked to the wrong terminal, so this obviously shows how long it's been since I last flew. Now that I've found the correct terminal, I headed inside. It was really spooky with barely a single other person inside, and I had a quick squiz at this replica 1920s-ish Avro 504K, which was the first ever aircraft flown by Qantas. But back to the year 2020, which has been a completely rubbish year. After the virus almost decimated the aviation industry, domestic travel is slowly restarting, but with strict social isolation rules, with constant reminders all around the airport. Qantas emailed us the night beforehand suggesting we check in online and use electronic boarding passes to reduce any contact. Now, unlike in the past, they no longer have to print off a piece of paper at the boarding gate if you get a boarding pass on your phone. There were very minimal flights operating today, so I wandered around the terminal. Due to the isolation rules, all of the Qantas lounges have been closed for the time being, and while a free bite was always great, I really missed the views of the airport apron. But it was just great to be back in the airport. There's hand sanitation stations all around the airport, and rather understandably, there's very limited food options. Red Rooster, Gloria Jeans and a few other cafes were the only shops open, so I sat down for a quick breakfast. Now, I had already eaten, but considering how quiet the place was, I was keen to help support the small businesses who I imagine are paying fairly expensive rents in a place like this. Unfortunately, there weren't any newsagents open, and while Qantas do let you know that there's no in-flight entertainment or Wi-Fi on board, I was planning to buy a magazine to read, so that fell through. And here's our bus, the Qantas domestic workhorse, Boeing 737-800. Although in the background there are a few long-haul airliners, including a near-retired 747-400ER, and then next to that is the next generation 787 Dreamliner and the flagship Airbus A380. It's really sad to see these big birds sitting idle. Boarding was pain-free, first with business and status passengers, followed by everyone else, who boarded in groups starting from the back seats and then moving forward. This worked fairly well, minus my Qantas app crashing on my phone just before I needed my boarding pass. We were encouraged to pick up Fly Well packs, which I'll explore in more detail later, and there were constant announcements throughout the terminal reminding everyone to socially distance and wash hands, etc. Now here's my seat 4F, which has the advantage of extra legroom. So here's the Flywell kit, which has 2 hand sanitizer towels inside it and a face mask. Now the masks aren't mandatory and the majority of people didn't use them. I'll show you through the seat in a little more detail, including an individual air vent, which is always a highlight for me, and next to your knees is a fold-out TV screen.
Our priority is to get you to your destination safely, so some of our normal food, drinks and entertainment are temporarily out.
Inside your armrest is the usual fold-out table, and you can see that this one has been recently cleaned. There's pretty decent legroom, and of course there's a good view of the wing and the engine out the window. There's also a power plug and 2 USB ports down near your feet as well. We backed out and took off to the runway.
Welcome to Longreach, the home of Qantas. Give us your attention for the next few minutes to make your journey a safe one, as we take a journey through 100 years of innovation and Australian spirit.
In an understandable effort to reduce costs, there's no in-flight entertainment, so you only get a flight map. There's also no Qantas magazine, as that would also be an obvious source of contamination, so you need to bring everything yourself. I was pre-warned, so I started planning my next trip to New Zealand and enjoyed the view of an incredibly green and lush Southern Highlands out the window. There was a small snack offered, which was the standard pre-COVID, although there were no hot drinks to minimise the crew's contact with everyone, which also seemed fair enough. One thing everyone will be asking about is the seating, as there was no social distancing. I did actually have a seat empty next to me, although that wasn't intentional and was just down to good luck. Qantas argues a few points about this. Firstly, there are hospital-grade filters constantly sucking air out of the cabin and cleaning it, removing dust and viruses and things like that. Secondly, passengers don't sit face to face, and the seats themselves act as barriers in front and behind you. They argued that removing the middle seat would only provide for about 60 centimetres of social distancing anyway, and the reality is that the airfares would have to rise considerably if they couldn't sell as many seats. Instead, they suggest that if passengers are worried, they can wear a mask, which they provide, and wipe everything down with antiseptic towels. I can see their perspective, and I'll let the internet argue about it, although I figure they're probably fairly risk averse, because if there was any community spread via an aeroplane, I'd expect the government would put the brakes on easing of travel restrictions pretty quickly. The flight is only 60 minutes, so it wasn't long before we started our descent down into Melbourne. Now, I was possibly feeling a little sentimental, but I've never seen Victoria so green and lush before. At least if the drought is breaking, then that's one good news piece. Seeing what the virus has done to the aviation, travel, hospitality and well, almost every industry has been really sad. This footage at Melbourne where a ground maintenance engineer was gaffer taping up this Jetstar A321 was quite poignant. Clearly they're not expecting to use it for a while. I'm somewhat heartened to see the restrictions are lifting, which is what has allowed me to take this flight, and hopefully domestic travel at least will start to return to some level of normality. I've been really fortunate to have had job security during this pandemic, hence why I'm keen to do my bit and contribute to those industries and encourage others to do the same. Look, I totally understand people are doing it tough now, and I can completely appreciate you wanting to be frugal with your cash, but if you can afford it, why not celebrate the loosening of restrictions and go out for dinner or book a trip to a local tourist site. We flew directly over Melbourne CBD, getting great views. Once we spun around, we got more views looking back up the Yarra River and the CBD once again. So, how was the flight? Obviously things aren't ideal, but it was just great to be back in the air again. The airlines are clearly taking the whole thing very seriously, with constant reminders to socially distance, and the extra mask and wipes are good if you're a little nervous about returning to the skies. But otherwise, the passengers all seem to take it all seriously and maintained distancing, minus the whole boarding and deplaning part. But they did their best with a staggered deplaning process where you were only allowed to stand once the row in front of you had walked well away from you. Just make sure you bring something to read or watch, because there won't be anything on board or at the airport to buy. If you're into these kinds of videos, I would love for you to check out my channel. There are many more aviation videos from the pre-COVID era, both onboard flights and aviation museums around the world. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you'll now have a better insight into what it's like flying Qantas domestically during COVID. Hopefully this whole thing will be over soon and travel will return to normal. I'll finish with some rather somber views at Melbourne Airport of a whole mob of red kangaroos all grounded with the engines taped up. Thanks again, and I'll see you another time.